Good morning. My name is Mosura, and today I'll be giving you my thesis on the benefit of monopolies. The average consumer often feels wronged by large corporations because these corporations are represented by individuals who radiate wealth and unimagined prosperity, oftentimes setting them above the realities of the common American. They feel that these individuals do not deserve their social status because they have unfairly benefited off the backs of the working class. The truth is, there is a stigma around the term monopoly. When people hear the word monopoly, they feel victimized by the upper echelon of society, the richest of the rich who are in an unprecedented realm of wealth. However, this negative connotation immediately misrepresents the good that monopolies provide. The misconceptions of the negative effect that monopolistic companies have on the economy lead to flawed mindsets by the American citizens. Misconstrued and even miscommunicated monopolistic consequences leads to distrust of large corporations, causing voters to favor laws that are counterproductive to the best interest of economic growth and American safety and government officials who bend to anti-monopoly values. This ultimately results in negative economic consequences, such as higher taxes, which consequently results in higher consumer prices. But on the very extreme end, these misconceptions lead Americans to hate its economic system of capitalism and lead them to support other systems such as socialism. This is very important because the future of our country lies in the minds of the young generation. Our economy gets its strength and stability from large companies, and that is partly what caused us to become the economic superpower of the world. These misconceptions must be addressed before they have a chance to take root. As Plato wisely asserts in the Republic, the beginning is the most important part of the work. By identifying potential problems early, we lay a groundwork for lasting success and prevent larger and worse challenges from arising. Bernie Sanders is a senator from Vermont. He describes himself as a democratic socialist. He identifies as an independent, but ran for the Democratic Party nominations. Mr. Sanders stands for all types of socialist values. He believes in free college paid for at the expense of taxpayers, and he claimed that if he became president, he would eliminate the $1.6 trillion student debt loan. He also heavily supports the idea of wealth redistribution. This is the process of transferring wealth from higher earners to lower earners by taxing the higher earners more. And he would accomplish this wealth redistribution by increasing the marginal tax rate, implementing a progressive estate tax on multimillionaire inheritances, and by ending special tax breaks on capital gains for the top 1%. He also wants to effectively end the private healthcare insurance market. This would allow users to see the doctor without any copays or deductibles, but it would be paid for by the increased marginal tax rate. Lastly, he wants to expand the already failing program of Social Security. These are distinctly socialist values that would have a negative impact on our economy and could potentially result in putting our country's national security at risk. In Bernie Sanders' most successful presidential campaign in 2016, he received 43% of the Democratic popular vote, just barely losing to Hillary Clinton, who received 55% of the Democratic popular vote. This is undeniable evidence that Americans have something affecting their frame of mind, causing them to support socialism despite its historical shortcomings. A socialist president almost gaining their party's majority vote should be extremely concerning in a society founded on capitalism. I would argue that if Americans were more informed on the day-to-day benefits that a huge aspect of our capitalist economy, the large corporations, provide, then they would likely vote and think differently, resulting in protecting our country's great economic system. What if there was a certain market? And in that market, there were a multitude of small independent companies. And within this market, no one sought to drive each other out of business. No one used unethical tactics, and the market was extremely easy to enter. An entrepreneur with little to no experience in the field could create a company and become profitable. Prices in this market were purely determined based off of supply and demand. And this market was producing a product that was at a price to where a majority of the population could afford it. This, in economic terms, is referred to as perfect competition. But what if this so-called perfect competition market had room for improvement? What if a company came in and revolutionized the way that this product was manufactured? Could their process of getting their raw materials, refining their raw materials, and selling their raw materials be so efficient that it put almost every other company out of business? What if they were so successful that they lowered the cost to the consumer by nearly 70%? What if they made up and acquired nearly 90% of the market along the way, putting almost every other company out of business? Now, almost every other company getting put out of business would not be a bad thing because the consumer who's getting a great product for a great price and the employee who's having a well-paying, stable job would benefit from this. This theoretical market did in fact exist, and this company that had a 90% market share in its respective market was famously known as Standard Oil, founded by none other than John D. Rockefeller himself. Let me be very clear that I'm not arguing that monopolies are the best form of company 100% of the time. They have their drawbacks just like any company does, but we often neglect to think what the market would look like without these companies that dominate them. Google became a massive monopoly for one simple reason. It revolutionized the way that a massive amount of people could access data. Certain markets may not even exist today if it were not for the monopolies that dominate them. We as consumers are primarily concerned with three things. Is the product we are buying at a fair price? Does it work? And is there innovation in the market? Those first two are self-explanatory, but why would we care about innovation? Well, innovation is what improves the quality of the product, creates new products that improve our quality of life, and improves efficiency. Innovation is what streamlines production processes and lowers the cost to the consumer over time. Without innovation, we'll still be stuck to the Stone Age. Now, competition in the marketplace is often perceived as the only factor for innovation to exist. And without multiple companies of the relatively same size, how could innovation exist? Now, while competition does create a dynamic environment in the marketplace where companies strive to outdo each other and push boundaries, it is not the only factor for innovation to exist. There are countless examples of companies who've had the market cornered but continue to innovate despite this. As I stated earlier, Standard Oil is one of these many examples. But let's look at NVIDIA for now. NVIDIA is a technology company that manufactures computer components and creates computer software. According to prominent stock exchange company NASDAQ, NVIDIA has upwards of an 85% market share in its respective technology market. With this enormous market share, NVIDIA has the computer chip market almost cornered. But despite this, they have substantial levels of innovation. In 2024, NVIDIA released a new graphics processing unit on what they named the Blackwell platform, and this is used for things like generative AI. It uses up to 25 times less cost and energy consumption than its predecessor. NVIDIA is constantly releasing new graphics processing units that are better than their last one. They're constantly updating old drivers to give their consumers the most they possibly can out of their computer components. Now, if this does not prove that NVIDIA has substantial levels of innovation, let's look at some numerical data. In 2024, they spent roughly $8.5 billion on research and development, which was an increase from 2023, in which they spent $7.5 billion on research and development. This amount that they spent is very significant. A small company in a competitive atmosphere could spend nowhere near this amount. Now, the argument could be made that all the companies combined in a collective market could spend that same amount on research and development, resulting in the same outcome. But this is simply not the case. When one company is innovating, it is able to waste zero time inventing something that has already been invented. If one company had the same starting point as a collective group of companies, and both groups were given the same amount to spend on research and development, the one company would see more breakthrough. Or the multiples of companies would stumble on the same problems multiple times and make the same mistakes, a single company would encounter the problem once and move on. This theory is mirrored by the work of world-renowned economist Joseph Sumter in his theory of creative destruction, in which he stated that one monopolistic firm would not duplicate its efforts, or in competitive markets, multiple firms might duplicate each other's research, which slows innovation and wastes resources. Another aspect of monopolies that is often overlooked and unknown to the general public is how they protect the American people's data and keep business within our country. Antitrust laws are laws that we have set in place in America to prevent anti-competitive acts from happening within the marketplace. And these laws have been used in the past to force large companies to separate into smaller companies. Now, if these laws were used to force large companies, for example, Apple, Google, or Meta, to separate due to their sheer market size, then this would lead to a foreign company dominating the marketplace. If Google, Apple, or Meta were forced to separate, then a foreign company would dominate it. Likely in this case, it would be a Chinese company. This could pose national security risks for our country in terms of our data being misused. And it would lead to a weaker economy because this massive market that was once in our country has now gone out to other countries. A strong country depends on more than just a strong military. It depends on economic strength. A strong economy is what gives us international influence and power. And without a strong economy, we would lack the income to fund a strong military. Large corporations are what allow us to compete in global markets. Small companies simply cannot compete with foreign rivals. Some critics have asserted that unequal rules in the marketplace, referring to a difference in laws, for example, in America we have antitrust laws and China may not, could lead to arbitrary winners or losers in the marketplace, resulting in benefiting bad actors or foreign competitors at the expense of U.S. technological innovation. It could stop platforms from installing certain security measures. For example, Google Chrome has spam filters for malware protection, and Apple has pop-up notifications, which allows users to decline being tracked across multiple platforms. If a foreign company dominated these marketplaces, then these privacy restrictions and regulations may not exist. Small companies simply cannot compete with foreign rivals like large corporations do. Another argument could be made that monopolies lead to inefficiencies in the market. On the micro level, this is true, but on the macro level, this cannot be any further from the truth. Adam Smith, who is considered the father of modern economics, created the theory of economies of scale. Economies of scale is when an increase in production reduces costs. So fixed costs, things like administration salaries and overhead, are spread over more units of production. Monopolies are able to make the most efficient use of this because they are selling the largest quantity of products within their marketplace. So their fixed costs, like I stated, administration salaries, overhead, etc., are spread over more units of production. So they're able to work over smaller profit margins, resulting in being able to sell the product at a cheaper price to the consumer. Monopolies are also able to make use of vertical integration. This is when one company controls two or more aspects of the supply chain. This results in nothing but a higher quality product and greater supply chain reliability. Consolidated Edison Incorporated is a major utility provider in New York City. They provide electricity to millions of consumers, so they are able to put infrastructure costs over these millions of consumers. The larger the amount of consumers they have, the lower the cost is per unit of electricity. Because they are one firm, they are able to coordinate efficiency of the grid and reduce overlap in infrastructure. Because they are one company, they are able to respond quickly when things like disasters happen. They centralize the delivery of electricity and avoid an overlap in infrastructure. Monopolies are often said to lead to poor working conditions. This assumption is false. Monopolies often lead to great employee benefits and working conditions. A great way to see how well employees are being treated is to see how long they stay at said company. A turnover rate is how many employees leave a said company within a said time span. And for NVIDIA, in their 2024 fiscal year, their turnover rate was approximately 2.7%, and the industry average is 17.7%. So this is evidence that employees enjoy working there and they stay there. Large corporations are often able to provide great benefits for their companies that small companies could not, such as healthcare, and for example, NVIDIA has a great stock purchasing program for their employees. Lastly is the argument that monopolies lead to inequitable wealth redistribution. This assumption is false in context to a capitalist economy like ours. Everyone has the privilege to create a company and build them up as much as they would like. Everyone has the right to own a large company. Wealth distribution in a capitalist economy is largely determined by individual effort, innovation, and market forces, and not by the existence of some large corporations. The individuals that profit vast quantities of money are only benignly rewarded because the companies that they take on the risk for provide value for many people. And it's also important to see where these ideas stem from. I would argue that this whole idea of inequitable wealth redistribution or unfair wealth redistribution is a result of jealousy. As we can see in James 3:14, it states that if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. Instead of viewing wealth creation as a result of greed or injustice, we should recognize that it is a reflection of the value provided to society, and the wealthiness of an individual or sheer largeness of a company is a result of meeting needs and not simply a transfer of resources. In conclusion, monopolies are often criticized for their ability to stifle competition and take advantage of consumers, but these things are seldom seen in the real market. Monopolies have their flaws just like any company, but their benefits heavily outweigh these flaws. They are able to innovate in ways that small corporations could not. They stabilize the markets, and they provide stable jobs. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft are examples that companies are able to innovate in ways that highly fragmented markets could not. Ultimately, their dominance stems from one simple truth. They provided a valuable product that countless consumers deem valuable and spend their money on. Thank you. I would like to open up for questions.
Miller, Ms. Cheney would like to congratulate you. You will historically be the very first senior to present their senior thesis in the brand new library.
Thank you, thank you.
Congratulations. Secondly, I have no idea what you were talking about. But you knew what you were talking about, so that's the most important thing.
Thank you, so we're going for.
So I do think it's interesting that from the time you started your research on all of this to today, we've had an election. And I'm curious to know if the change in administration has affected any of your research, or if you went back and looked at any of that.
It did not affect much. There are some things that happened within the past few weeks and months that pertain to this topic very specifically, but the election has not affected it. It has not.
Good. Thank you.
Hi, Miller.
Hello, Mr. Jotty.
So I was just sitting here thinking, so it's one way I take what you just said is that you really are making a case in some ways for the large company, mega corporation. Your thesis about monopolies. My question for you would be, I think about in places like Mexico where the government runs the entire petroleum industry, and there's no gas station except the gas station that the government owns, or in China where the government owns many aspects of sectors of the market. I don't think that you would say that those would be positive things, but maybe you could speak to that. Can you see examples of a monopoly that's not a good example of a monopoly?
Yes, sir. Government organized monopolies often are run very poorly. As I'm a huge fan of less government intervention. And I guess I should have made clear that I'm arguing for monopolies in context to a capitalist society, because at the end of the day, it's kind of been proven that the economy works itself out, and so the less government intervention possible, the better generally. And so, yes, monopolies that are run by governments and the Chinese monopolies for the gas and petroleum that you were talking about, I didn't research those, but from what we can tell, they aren't run very poorly. The consumers are not benefiting off of that, but I am specifically talking about monopolies in context to a capitalist economy and their benefits, because monopolies that are run by the government generally are not run very well, as most things run by the government are.
So Miller, great job, first of all.
Thank you.
Excellent. As I've studied some of this with you, I found myself having just a negative connotation about monopolies, just because that's what I had heard or thought I was supposed to think. But then as I've read what you've written and listened to you today, I realize that's not always the case. You know, there are some good things. The current thing that's in the news right now about Meta, like they keep talking about, it's like, I'm not a big social media guy, but it's like Facebook, Instagram, and one other platform are like all under one thing. What's the fear there? What's like, because when I hear what you're saying, I'm thinking, well, what's the problem? Mm-hmm. But obviously somebody thinks there's a problem. What is the fear that large company?
Yes, sir.
They need to break that up.
Yes, sir. So, yeah, there was a case proposed against Meta because their main evidence for that was Mark Zuckerberg sent out an email saying it's better to buy than to compete. And so they're saying that because Mark Zuckerberg's company Meta owns Instagram, Facebook, and those other platforms, that, you know, he has the market, he can do what he wants, he can publicize his data the way he wants to. Which, I don't know, is kind of subjective in terms of a social media platform. It's hard to numerically say how that's affecting the consumer. But I've read about that, and I don't know, how has the consumer been neglected in this? I feel like they really haven't. I mean, we all use Instagram and Facebook on the daily. You know, how have we felt that these apps have been being neglected because Mark Zuckerberg owns all of them? I don't think there's a strong case to be made there. But I guess the fear is that if, let's say, one company owned every single social media platform, then they could, you know, put out and publicize data how they want to, which would be a terrible thing, of course. But I would argue that in our economy, if, let's say, Meta somehow bought up X and every single social media platform that ever existed, then a new one would arise. Like, for example, Rumble is an app that came up not too long ago, and it was basically saying, you know, we're not going to do what YouTube did, we're not going to do what Instagram did. You can put out whatever you want, and we're not going to censor anything. And so I think if that happened, they decided to go haywire, then another company would just come up and publicize data uncensored.
Excellent job, Miller. I was especially impressed by your description of perfect competition and what happens when you disrupt that. That was phenomenal. Two questions. One, on the flip side of what Mr. Patton asked, what's the danger of U.S. breaking up these monopolies, especially like Google, NVIDIA, Facebook, for instance?
So, yeah, these companies are, founded in America, so they have to obey the American laws. And so if, like, let's say a Chinese tech company dominated the market, then they could do whatever they wanted, and they would have access to literally all of our data. Like, let's say Apple got broken up, and so now some Chinese company dominated the phone market. So we all had some kind of Chinese phone in our hands, then they would have access to quite literally all of the American people's data, which could potentially be used against us. Now, I'm not sure in what specific ways, but I say that's a pretty huge thing if the Chinese government has access to the infrastructure of the technology market. Because, like, I don't know if this is a good example, but like in Russia, if I'm not mistaken, Putin can just take down all of the electricity and all of the Wi-Fi that's in the country, so no one can access anything. And let's say if China all of a sudden decided, hey, let's try to take over America, then they could effectively force everyone's phones to not work or take advantage of our data, use it against us, and things in that way. Does that answer your question?
That's great. Yeah, that's really powerful. Next question is a little bit complicated, but
Okay.
it's related and it kind of challenges a little bit your the dangers of monopoly. So last week there was an undercover reporter who interviewed someone who's in management at Johnson & Johnson, who's an oligopoly. It's not a true monopoly, but they have a monopoly power with some devices, medical devices. And he's basically saying how Johnson & Johnson loves to partner with and be the main source of income for a lot of these smaller, innovative companies, and then to pull back their contracts so that the company goes bankrupt so they get the technology. You see,
Yes,
what
sir.
are some of the main dangers you see with monopoly, and how might this be an example of something like that?
Yes, sir. I guess like that's the whole fear with large companies is they can take advantage of the market and manipulate it in ways that they would like Johnson & Johnson is doing. But that is probably the worst case of a monopolistic company that I can think of in America that's taking advantage of the consumers the most. But I still feel like if they really started to abuse their power, which I'm not saying that doesn't count, but if they truly did start abusing their power, then I feel like another corporation would come up from that. So there are dangers in that, and that is the monopoly taking advantage of it, which from our research, like the pharmaceutical industry is the worst case of it. But there's still ways for other corporations to arise if they truly did act like some despot or power.
All right, thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
I do have one quick question. I know there are probably some questions out there. Why should we feel better about Mark Zuckerberg having all of our information instead of Xi Jinping?
Well, I don't know about you, but I would much rather an American Mark Zuckerberg have my data than South Korea or China or any country like that. I mean, I guess.
But why is my question is why?
Well, he's an American. He's not Who's Xi Jinping? Who's that?
He's the head of China.
The head of China? Okay. Well, I think that it's a pretty clear difference there. I mean, we have an American citizen and then the head of China who could use his military forces against us. I mean, at the end of the day, Mark Zuckerberg is just a guy trying to, maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but at the end of the day, I feel like he's just a guy trying to create a company that turns a profit. And I guess he could use his power for the wrong things, but I think there is a clear difference from a Chinese government authority and then an American citizen.
So one more follow-up question, and this is actually related to Ainsley's topic that's coming up.
Ooh, little overlap.
Okay, especially for social media, picking on Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. Do you think they're using their monopoly power to influence kids negatively, and is that a problem? And maybe you had thought about that. Maybe we need Ainsley's presentation before you get here.
I mean, I don't think that the headquarters of Meta is saying, "Hey, let's go and take advantage of these young kids and implement bad things into their brain and force them to grow up to be terrible people." I don't think that's true. I feel like, I don't know, the trajectory of like the whole world in itself has kind of, gone downhill ever since the fall of the Garden of Eden. And so I think things are just going to get worse and worse and lead more away from God and the values that we should be pursuing. But, I mean, we have things like YouTube Kids, so that they censor things. But, yeah, I don't think they're
Hey, I really
using that.
That's a great answer. A little pushback. They may not say, hey, we want to ruin kids' lives, but they may say, we're not going to offer these protections because it would hurt our company. And so we're going to protect our monopoly power at the expense of kids. I think that's the greater danger, is not trying to do it, but inadvertently doing it and then saying, to stop that would mess up our company, so we're not going to do that kind of thing.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I have not looked into that. I guess the only thing I can think of that is a true kids platform is YouTube Kids. I haven't really looked into that at all. But I guess, for example, I have Facebook, and they took away my Facebook Marketplace privileges because I'm not 18, so maybe they're trying to protect me there. I'm just joking, but you're right. They could take advantage of kids in a way that they inadvertently aren't meaning to, but
Good job. Thank you.
I'm research that. And we're done. Thank you.